Today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the BBB standards for charity accountability and how meeting them can benefit your nonprofit. My name is Mara McGinnis. I am the director of the Charity Accountability Program of the Education and Research Foundation of the BBB of Metro New York. Based on today's registration, I'm seeing that there are people attending this webinar from all over. So today is not going to be just about New York. We're going to be talking about the BBB standards as a whole. Some housekeeping. For today's webinar, this will be recorded and I will be sending the deck over email as well in an e-blast that will be following today's webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them throughout today's session. I'm the only speaker today, so I will be checking in on those questions periodically as I go along. But if there is a more involved question that's very specific to your organization, still feel free to shoot me a question, and then if it's too involved, I will email you or give you a call after the session to discuss further. But if it's a general question about the standards or about how to become a BBB accredited charity, I'm happy to answer those questions as well. So to get started, we can talk a bit about the Better Business Bureau and about the reason why we do what we do in our vision. So the BBB helps people find businesses and charities that they can trust. So it was founded over 100 years ago, and there are nearly 100 regional BBBs. And the vision is an ethical marketplace where buyers and sellers can trust each other. So there's different standards for marketplace trust as it pertains to businesses, but today we're going to be talking about charities. So the Metro New York BBB Foundation mission is to be a leader in advancing marketplace trust, similar to businesses, by upholding and recognizing ethical business charity standards and practices in New York. So that includes, is not limited to charity accountability reports. Primarily, we will be talking about those charity reports today and talk about those standards. But in addition to that, we also host educational programs for charity and business leaders as well as consumers. So look out for any webinars or different workshops that we will be hosting that have to do with nonprofit trends. So these nonprofit trends pertain to accounting, fundraising, governance. We're always looking for what's happening in the nonprofit space and then hosting those educational programs to further learning. That would also cover today's session. We hope that you get some educational value from this presentation. So a bit about BBB charity reporting. There are 64 program locations in the BBB system. And in terms of who we cover at the Metro New York BBB Foundation, we evaluate organizations that are in the 5 boroughs, Long Island, and parts of the Mid-Hudson, but we also collaborate with upstate New York. So we're also looking at upstate New York BBB accreditation as well. So if you are coming and joining us from upstate New York, you'd likely be collaborating with me on that report. So why do we do what we do? Essentially, we were asked to do it. So businesses and consumers were receiving solicitations about different claims that charities were making, and we wanted to provide a real service to the public to indicate if this charity is actually doing what they are soliciting for what they're doing, and to verify that. So as we know it really today, the national program merged and became the BBB Wise Giving Alliance. So the BBB Wise Giving Alliance is working to accredit charities who have a national or international reach. We're looking at organizations in the Metro New York area. So some key practices that we are looking for in the BBB standards for charity accountability, there's 20 standards and they all kind of nicely fit within 4 different sections. That's governance and oversight, finances, measuring effectiveness, and fundraising and informational materials. So these standards were developed by a national panel of experts based on research about donor information needs. So when we're looking at these standards, these were not just created by BBB. This was also created by different experts in the nonprofit sector. 3 recommended practices that are not necessarily tied into the standards are diversity and pluralism, adherence to the law, and prioritizing open and ethical behavior. Those align really nicely with key practices and align nicely with the 20 standards. So some guiding concept for the BBB standards, this is a voluntary disclosure. So every organization that you see that has a BBB charity report that's filled out, if they're accredited, that's because that organization and the BBB work together on that voluntary basis. So this indicates to donors and online visitors that they're willing to get themselves evaluated to see if they meet those 20 standards and to really show that level of commitment to transparency. Of course, accuracy of reporting and solicitations, as I just mentioned. When you receive a solicitation and you see a claim, can you really verify that what they are promoting themselves to be doing in terms of their mission or their programs, can they verify that that's what they're doing? That's where we step in and assist. Duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. Again, that active oversight of financials and governance, making sure that that's being done in your organization, as well as focusing, of course, on achieving your nonprofit mission. So we're evaluating these key practices, but we are not rating them. So you'll never see a nonprofit being rated A to F. That's not how we do it here. What we're doing is we're looking again at these 20 standards. We're evaluating those key practices. If, for example, your organization is not meeting one of those standards, then that would indicate that you're just not meeting that one standard. However, that would not knock you down to a B or a C. It's strictly evaluating those key practices and standards based in that way. We're also looking at generally accepted accounting principles and GAAP for consistency. So when we're looking at your financials, we're going to talk more about those thresholds of who needs to submit an audit, who might fall more into a CPA review or internally prepared documents. But if you do have an audit, we are going to be looking at that audit for consistency's sake. So GAAP compliant financials are preferred. And the reason why that is because the Form 990 is not quite sufficient alone if you are obligated to submit that audit. We want to make it an equal playing field for all organizations who we evaluate, and that's why we look at their audits. But in terms of that, and when we're talking about financials, we understand that accountability is more than just your financials. And that's why we hope that with these standards as a whole, we're able to really encompass so much more of your organization and show so much more about your organization rather than just your financials. So you might ask what the benefit of BBB accreditation or going through this process would be. So for donors, it's a free, quick way to check if charities are meeting those high standards. So if you're a donor and you want to give to an organization, checking on bbb.org, quick Google search for your organization's name, BBB, and then pulling up that report, that's a very quick and free way to verify that you're meeting those 20 standards. If you do meet those standards, and we'll talk more about the SEAL program at the end, that's more for my program necessarily. If you do license that BBB charity seal, that indicates to donors and online visitors that you have met those standards, and ideally that links to your report. And that report will also go into more detail about how you're meeting those standards. So the benefit for charities is it varies. It depends on the organization. A great benefit to charities is that these are helpful key practices in and of itself. So by meeting those standards once every 2 years, and we'll talk more about what the timeline looks like of how often to submit. This is a way for all of your organization to kind of work together on this common goal, which is to get that evaluation and to hopefully get BBB accredited. So this requires different staff members to be giving and providing different information. That could be board meeting attendance. And so maybe you're talking to the executive assistant at your organization. Maybe you're talking to your accountant at your organization to get financials. Everyone is kind of working together collaboratively to meet these 20 standards. For BBB accreditation, just meeting all standards, there's no fee to that. It's completely free to meet our 20 standards. So again, if you are someone who does not want to pay the licensing fee for the BBB seal, you can still be able to be shown as BBB accredited on bbb.org. So if an online visitor or donor Googles your name, BBB, pulls up your report, it'll still show that you're meeting those 20 standards. And it will show those green check marks that you are accredited. In terms of the BBB seal, that's the fundraising tool. So to be able to license that seal to go onto your website, or fundraising solicitations, and to be included in our biannual ad campaigns, that does come with a licensing fee. But if you are not licensing the seal, or if you are, this is how your report would look. You will see that the green check marks indicate that you are meeting all of those standards. Again, it's standards based and we're evaluating those key practices. This is an accredited charity. The only difference, if you were a seal holder, it would show right next to the accredited charity green check mark, it would show that BBB seal. You can see here some additional information that we do have about an organization. So for example, your purpose or your mission, a quick description of your program services, what you offer, your governance, so that would look like your CEO, your board chair, staff size, and board size, as well as different fundraising methods that are being used. So if someone receives a direct mail appeal, this is a good way to say, all right, this organization does use direct mail appeals, so this is probably coming directly from this organization, as well as verifying the tax status. So verifying that you are indeed a 501c3 nonprofit. We also give a quick financial overview so we can see your source of funds here. That's again taken directly from your audited financial statements or your CPA review. You can see where that money is coming from and the total income. We also see the program, fundraising, and admin. That's all broken down, as well as your assets and liabilities. This is taken again completely from the audit, and that's why, for that consistency purpose sake, that's why we're looking at those GAAP compliant financial documents. So for the general areas of focus for the Charity Accountability Program, we're looking at organizations that are publicly soliciting donations, and that includes government grants. So the primary function of really what we're doing is we're looking for organizations to be really transparent about different information about their organization, because they're likely soliciting directly to donors to say, this is what we're doing, this is what we want you to give to. And that's when we're really wanting to step in to help facilitate that relationship between donors and that good giving and that good feeling to give, knowing that they can look to see if that charity is BBB accredited and feel good about that decision. Organizations in the news or otherwise of interest to the public. Eligible organizations who request BBB charity reports. And we do focus on larger charities who are collecting a greater share of dollars in business for 3+ years, but we also may evaluate smaller organizations. So when we're looking at organizations who are collaborating with us, again, one, it's completely voluntary disclosure, and two, they're soliciting to the public. So we want to give the public as much information as we can. So with that, I will jump right into the standards. We're going to start with standards 1 through 5, which have to do with governance. Again, for anyone who might have joined a little bit later, these will all be sent to you, so there's no need to hurt your hand while you're writing down all of these notes. I'm happy to send this to you. And again, if you have a very specific question, which happens all the time during these standards briefings, I'm happy to talk offline with you about them. Okay, so standard 1 is board of directors providing adequate oversight of charities' operations. So for example, we're looking at financial controls here. Standard 1 really encapsulates many different components into this standard, probably the most of all of the 20. So for example, we're wanting to ensure that your board is formally approving your budget, you're monitoring your conflict of interest policy, reviewing financial statements, your 990, a regular CEO performance review, it goes on. So if you are collaborating in any way, if you yourself, if you're a staff member here who might be a CEO or working very closely with the board, these are all things to consider when you are really meeting for your board meetings, making sure that all of these things are taking place. Of course, there's also New York State law regarding whistleblower policy and related party transactions, conflict of interest, etc. So ensuring that you are following the law is, of course, a strongly recommended practice. We also do wish to call upon just checking in with the Charities Bureau in general. This was a disclosure requirement for solicitation for charitable contributions. So if you have not heard of this, I would suggest going to this link if you are in New York. Standard 2 is a little bit easier. We're looking for a board of directors with a minimum of 5 voting members. That's it. Standard 3 is your board meetings, and this was tied for the second Miss Standard of 2021. So this just kind of brings my attention to slowing down a bit to chat about what the standard entails and hopefully ensuring that as many charities as we're working with can meet this standard. So we're looking for organizations to have a minimum of 3 evenly spaced full board meetings with a majority in attendance. So majority means 50%. We would look at your 3 with highest attendance if there are more board meetings. So let's say that you had a great show of at least 70% at 3 of your board meetings, and maybe there was a little bit less during some board meetings that had 40, 50. We would take the average and we would take the 3 with the highest if there are more than 3. So in the age of COVID and in the age of remote work, in the age of the pandemic, we have really emphasized the importance of understanding that these board meetings, while we say that they should be face-to-face, that now includes Zoom, that includes Google Meet, Teams, any different online platform where you can see and hear each other is really important. One phone conference can be allowed for one of these 3 board meetings, but we understand that these decisions that we're making as a board and as a staff are really important. So having that full attention with video on face-to-face, that qualifies as such. So again, we understand that getting a full board to attend a meeting in person might be pretty difficult right now, but having that Zoom component is really helpful. So moving right ahead, standard 4 is board compensation. So not more than 1 or 10%, whichever is greater, indirectly or directly compensated persons are serving as voting members of the board. So compensated person should not be the board chair or treasurer, and a chair must not be performing the same role of CEO or COO, whether or not he or she is compensated. This comes into play often when organizations are smaller and just starting out, where one person might be wearing many different hats in an organization. So when we say for business in 3+ years or organizations that are larger, this is part of the reason why we are looking at that in terms of our real interest and our focus. We want to ensure that you have the time, the autonomy, and really the funds to make sure that all of these things can be done and you can create that foundation before submitting for your evaluation. We again understand that some smaller organizations might have multiple people playing multiple roles, but it's really important to know that the chair should not also be performing the same role as the CEO, and the compensated persons on the board should not be chair or treasurer. So that includes staff members too. I think I covered all of that right off the top of my head. So if you have any questions about your organization specifically about this, feel free to be in touch. Standards 1 through 5, to wrap this up, we're going to be talking about related party transactions. As a note, there is, of course, New York State law surrounding conflict of interest and related party transactions. So definitely look into that, but I will be explaining a bit more about how we look at this at the BBB for Standard 5. So no transactions in which any board or staff members have material conflicting interests with the charity resulting from any relationship or business affiliation. Simply put, if you are a board member and you are also the CEO of your own company and you're providing a good or service to the charity, probably at a great discount, just making sure that there's competitive bids being sought, the size and duration of the transaction, whether the interested party was present for the board vote. These are all factors to consider when receiving that related party transaction. Again, definitely suggest first and foremost that you see the New York State law surrounding this. All right, so that wraps up governance. So we'll move ahead to measuring effectiveness, which is standard 6 and 7. This was also tied for the second most missed standard of 2021. So we will slow down to chat a bit more about what this means. Standard 6 and 7 are kind of like sisters in the sense that they both really relate to one another. Standard 6 is about having a policy, and then standard 7 is about the report that comes from that policy. But standard 6 is having a board policy of assessing no less than every 2 years the organization's performance and effectiveness. and of determining future actions required to achieve its mission. I want to read that out because I know that it sounds a little intimidating. To break that down, we're looking for a policy that says, all right, once every 2 years, let's take a moment to just talk about our programs, talk about our mission. Have we really been fulfilling that mission? Have we been effective at fulfilling that mission? And some things to consider when you are creating this policy and you are having this conversation at least once every 2 years, you want to make sure that the organization or your organization has clearly identifiable and measurable goals to make that happen. So do you have a process to evaluate the success or impact of your programs? Are you looking at those key metrics if those are relevant to your organization? Making sure, again, that this conversation is happening once every 2 years. We don't judge the process or the results of your assessment. So if you're saying that there's a program that you started and you're realizing it's not going quite according to plan and maybe it's not totally relevant for your organization to continue with this program, maybe we should cut it. That's fine. I don't have to know a thing. Just as long as you're having that conversation and being really honest about the path that you're beginning to take once every 2 years, we think that's a really great check-in. If you're an organization that has maybe a 10-year strategic plan, 5-year strategic plan, that's totally fine and honestly impressive. We want to make sure that you're checking in on that strategic plan once every 2 years. So if you have it for forecasting what might be 10 years from now, that's great, just as long as you're checking in on that and saying, okay, are we on track? That's important to meeting the standard. Now, the sister of that is the written report. So once you have this, you have the policy in place that says we have to do this once every 2 years. Do you create a written report after that assessment? So the governing body should review and approve a written report outlining the results of that assessment against mission goals and recommendations for future actions. So this written report could be truly as simple as notes that were written for your board meeting during this assessment and provided to the board. This could be a slide deck that is presented at the board meeting that follows that says, remember how we did this? This is how it went. Here are our notes. Here's the report. We're going to send this to all of you so you have this information. The strategic plan performance evaluations may qualify if they meet these criteria. And if you have never done this before, you've never started the measuring effectiveness policy, and you wouldn't even know where to begin to talk about reporting your conversation, these are 5 questions on screen that you might be able to ask yourselves and hopefully answer when you are creating this report. Okay, so I wanted to mention for your measuring effectiveness policy, if you don't have one and you've never created one before, we have a template of what that might look like. Certainly is not going to be perfect for every organization or completely fit, but if you don't know where to start and you're looking for a template, feel free to be in touch. I actually think in the e-blast I send out after this, it does include a link to that. So I'm happy to provide that. There are a few standards that require different information that we do have templates about. So I'll try to keep a mental note about which ones do. So then if you have any interest in receiving them, I'm happy to provide them. But moving along to financial standards. The financial standards are 8 through 14. Standards 8, 9, and 10 are the only financial standards that set target spending ratios. So we'll talk more about what that means and what we're looking for those ratios. But again, wanting to take that pause button for a second and say that we realize that your financials aren't everything. So there is the overhead myth that indicates, we do all of this, all of the money that we collect goes right to programs, nothing for fundraising, nothing for admin. We are 100% giving all to programs. That is probably, that's probably not the case for your organization. And it's important for donors to understand that nonprofits don't operate like that. It's important for nonprofits to be transparent about the fact that they don't. So working with those, within that overhead myth, just wanting to dispel that right away. By itself, overhead ratio, as we understand, is not the best indicator of nonprofit performance because other factors that do matter are transparency, which would be creating a BBB charity evaluation. You know, your governance, your leadership, your results, these are all really important factors to consider when giving to an organization and also to let donors know. As of February 2022, 95% of Metro New York BBB evaluated charities did meet the program and fundraising ratio standards. 5% or fewer did not meet them. So we do believe that, and we do know that these ratios are more easily met. So now we have the program expense ratio, standard 8. Program expenses, we look for them to be 65% or more. So financial statements must break out their program expenses versus their total expenses. And we look at your total program expense versus your total expenses, and that should be at least 65% or more. So if you are a newer organization and let's say that you're not at the point of a CPA review and you're not at the point of an audit, maybe you're looking at kind of doing all of this internally, which is a lot of work. Understanding what is a program expense and what is not a program expense is a really great place to start. So looking at GAAP, looking at what they're looking for in that program expense is a great way to begin looking at your expenses and understanding where things are going. Not necessarily salaries, for example, might not necessarily go directly to admin. They might actually play a huge part in your programs. So getting that clarification is really great right as you're beginning your organization and setting that groundwork and foundation. Standard 9 is your fundraising expense ratio. We're looking for 35% or less of related contributions to be spent on fundraising. So there we're taking your total fundraising expense and we're dividing that by your total related contributions, and at most, this should be 35%. The denominator there is total related contributions generated by fundraising activity. The easiest and most distinct way to break this down is saying when you're raising $1, does it cost 35 cents or less to raise that dollar? So if you are working to raise donations from individuals, your private corporate funders, donated goods, bequests, etc., is it costing more than 35 cents to raise this dollar? If it is, then you would not be meeting this standard. If it is not, you would be meeting this standard. And the last ratio that we have is standard 10, which is the accumulation of funds. And this was actually the most missed standard of 2021. This is a standard when we're looking at in COVID, when we're thinking about keeping unrestricted net assets. It's important to just discuss what that would look like. We're wanting to avoid accumulate funds that could be used for current year activities. And the way that we look at this is we're looking at your unrestricted net assets for use available. Those should not be over 3 times your last year's expenses or 3 times the size of your current year's budget. So you might be thinking that you might be in a pretty lucky position to have this cash available for use. And if there is some extenuating circumstance why that is the way that is, you can still meet this standard. The way that you would meet this standard is by including a disclosure on your fundraising solicitations, on your donate button, on your donate page that says, we do have more than 3 times our last year's expenses in unrestricted net assets available for use, and you might explain the reason why this might be the case. Only donor restricted funds are considered restricted. So your board restricted funds, those would still be considered in this standard to be unrestricted. This is a lot of accounting talk, or it might make perfect sense to you depending the type of person you are at your nonprofit. So if you have any questions or you want to take a look at your audit, I'm happy to also take a look at your audit. I've seen it all. But why is this important and why does this standard really exist is because donors expect that their contributions will be spent on current programs. When we say current programs, at this point, we're not saying, or at any point, we're not saying that the amount of money that you have in unrestricted net assets should be spent in programs, admin, or fundraising. We're not saying that. We're saying that it just needs to be spent. And this has been confirmed in public survey research, and that full disclosure ensures that donors will not be misled. So when you're giving a gift or you're giving a donation, you do have the expectation that it will be spent and that it won't be sitting in unrestricted net assets. But again, there are extenuating circumstances for different organizations, and you can still meet the standard by including that disclosure. Standard 11 has to do with availability, making available to all upon request complete annual financial statements prepared in accordance with GAAP. So when we're looking at an organization that has $1 million in income per year, we're looking at that full CPA audit. If you're an organization that's bringing in $250,000 to $1 million, that would be a CPA review. And if you're under $250,000 internally prepared statements, that would be maybe like your 990. When we're looking at this and when we're looking at that audit, again, it's all for consistency, and that's the reason why we are making that available to donors and online visitors on our own reports, because it's easily consistent for all organizations. If you have any questions about where you should be filing, how you should be filing, when we're looking at total income, we mean total income, not fundraising revenue, total income. Definitely look to your Charities Bureau in your state, but this is the standard for BBB reports. Standard 12 is including the financial statements, a breakdown of expenses according to your programs, fundraising, and admin. I'll be saying that a few times throughout this webinar until the end. We're looking for your programs. If you have multiple, we would want those to be broken down as well. Fundraising and admin, it's not enough to just say supporting services and include those two together. We're looking for those to be broken down. So it might look like this if you have two different programs. You have your program A, program B, fundraising, and admin. So of course, it's important to be accurate. Your financial documents are fundraising representations as well, and that you want to be as honest and truthful to your donors as possible. So why is this important? One, your IRS Form 990 just includes it and requires it. So why not do it on your audit? Why not do it on your budget, which we'll get to if you're going to be doing it on your IRS Form 990. It's also a critical management tool for staff and board. It's important to indicate to your financial stakeholders, okay, this is where our money is going. This is, if you have multiple programs, maybe a good majority of your funds are going to that program and not so much on that other one. It's just telling that financial story right in your audit. Standard 13, we're looking at accurately reporting your organization's joint allocations. So some problems may arise if your organization is incorrectly claiming that zero fundraising expenses are happening at your organization. Unclear reporting about financial and governance relationships with affiliates or your fundraising main organization, or misunderstandings just as a whole about your true fundraising expenses. So that's why it's really important to break all of those down by your admin and your fundraising. If you're an organization who indicates that they have zero fundraising, I'm going to be very curious as to why that is. If you're sending out e-blasts, if you are having social media appeals, if you're submitting grants to the government or to foundations, how is that happening at zero expense? We will have to ask that question. That's why it's important to just really be honest to your stakeholders about the true cost of your fundraising expenses. And standard 14 wraps up financial standards. This is the budget. So we're looking at your current year budget, and we're looking for two things. One, for it to be board approved, and two, for the program fundraising and the administration expenses to be broken out, just like in your audit, just like in your Form 990. We're looking for you to look ahead to the future for your projected expenses and say, this is what we expect to spend on programs, fundraising, and admin. So an example of a budget that would not meet BBB standards is on your screen right now. You can see the natural classifications. You can see your board support and your rent and your telephone, but it's not indicated to me how much of this is program admin and fundraising. Even simpler, I'd say, is right here. So we're looking at your total programs. If you have multiple programs, breaking those out, your fundraising and your administration expenses. That's the budget that we're looking for. You'll notice here that it doesn't have these natural classifications. That's fine. We would expect to see your natural classifications with your functional expenses on your audit, which is a lot of work. Here, we're just looking at your totals. So if you truly just submitted via email to me your total programs, admin, and fundraising, that would actually meet the standard and to assure that it is board approved. If you don't have a budget at all and you want to begin creating one, it is April. It is not too soon to start looking at your budget for 2023. This would be a great resource to include. So for your fundraising standards, we're looking at standards 15 through 19, and these standards are really seeking to ensure that the charity's representation to the public is accurate, complete, and transparent. So standard 15 is specifically looking at fundraising solicitations, and we're looking at them to be not misleading, both in whole or in part. So some things that we're looking for in standard 15 is we're looking for a full, accurate disclosure in written and graphic representations about your charity. Something I see all the time is in fundraising solicitations is your ratios for your program fundraising and admin, saying that you spend 97% on programs. We want to ensure that we can substantiate that by looking at your audit. So if you're saying to the public, this is how much percentage we are spending in programs, can we look at your audit and really fulfill that? Was that true this year, or is that true 5 years ago? We want to make sure that those stories and photos are completely up to date and accurate. We're looking for key facts to be relevant to the donation, and your financial and success statistics, again, we'll be looking for substantiation for that. Another really common fundraising solicitation tactic I have seen is looking at, for example, an animal shelter and looking at a cute cat and saying that 100% of your donation will go strictly to this one cat, Ruby. Maybe that's not totally true. Maybe it's cats like Ruby. Maybe it's to support all of their programs as it relates to their animal shelter. Again, being as truthful and transparent is just a fantastic way to build that foundation of trust between you and your donor. Also, just protecting yourself, making sure that donors feel understood and that they feel like their donation is going to where they say it's going to. Explaining clearly how your funds will be used and be able to substantiate them is huge. If there is a red flag, for example, that 100% of your donation will go to Ruby, we are going to look into that. Same thing with zero fundraising costs. So just being honest. Your annual report, this is an example of a template I do have. So if you do not have an annual report, I would be happy to share what one would look like. This is something that we're seeing time and time again as a standard that might not be the easiest to meet, just depending on the nature of the organization. So we do hope that we can make it as easy to meet as possible. So there's a few ways to meet this standard. One is just having an annual report. And when we say an annual report, this is what we think should be in a report and what would meet this standard. 1, your mission statement. 2, your summary of your past year's program results. So this would be like if you have a music class, 152 of your students reported on Zoom and you were able to host those music lessons. Let's say that you have that animal shelter and that you rescued 52 pets in the past year. Those are all really specific examples of what would be considered a program result. Your roster of officers and members of the board, so including your board members as well as their titles, specifically chair and treasurer. And this is important, including financial information. So including your total income Your expenses broken down, again, by program admin and fundraising, taking that straight from the audit, not for the budget, unless that's something you'd want to do, but certainly not required. We would look for your audited financial summary to be included. And the most important thing is your ending net assets. I see a lot of annual reports with almost all of this information, but just forgetting about those ending net assets. What does have almost all of those things you might know or might have just been thinking is your 990. So your Form 990 does have your mission statement, your roster of officers and members of the board, and this financial information and much, much more. But what it doesn't necessarily have is your program service accomplishments. You might have in your Schedule O, for example, that you have a music class, that you did rescue animals. But if you're not giving those specific metrics of how many animals were rescued or how many music students you have, that would not qualify as an annual report. So my recommendation would be to include as much information on your 990 anyway. I mean, why not? You have to submit it. You have to do this on an annual basis. Why not just include as much information about your programs and be proud of what you were able to accomplish in that year? Because any opportunity to tell your story as a nonprofit is appealing. And just telling that results story in donor-friendly language is fantastic. But I will also mention that your Form 990 is not the easiest to read document. It can qualify as an annual report and it can qualify to meet Standard 16, but I prefer to look at annual reports that are in this donor-friendly language. There's pictures, it's colorful typically, and in reading that, I'm able to more firmly understand your story as an organization. It does not need to be glossy and it does not need to be expensive. You can include those pictures if you want to, but it's certainly not necessary. A one-page Word document that was converted to a PDF just to put on your website, that can be an annual report. And something that wouldn't qualify necessarily as an annual report would be website details that cannot be printed or sent as a document when requested. So if you have your 990 on one page and you have your board roster on another page and you have your program services accomplishments on another tab, collecting all that information and you can't easily print it, not necessarily an annual report. For your website disclosure though, for Standard 17, we look for all information from your annual report. So let's say that you have an annual report that meets Standard 16, put that on your website, and then that includes, as part of meeting, Standard 17. They kind of are sisters in that way too. This only applies to organizations that are soliciting donations. The year is 2022. I assume that if you are an organization who's attending this webinar, you probably have a donate button on your website. So that does mean that you are soliciting for those funds. If you don't, and maybe let's say that you accept contributions electronically, to call a contribution, to send even a check, that would be considered soliciting for funds on your website. So again, putting up that annual report that meets all standards, that would meet the components of meeting Standard 16. Your mailing address for right now during COVID, if you have a PO box, it's a little different new normal that we're all kind of adjusting to, but your mailing address, and that might just be on your 990, because we are going to look for your 990 to be on your website as well. We're going to look for your latest 990 to be on your website. So for example, a 990 from 2015, great for archive purposes, but we are going to look for the most recent. Standard 18 is your privacy policy. So addressing the privacy concerns of your donors is of course really important, especially when you're soliciting for donations that include credit card numbers, if that includes their full name, their address, all of these things that really are so important to personal privacy. We want to ensure that you have that privacy policy accessible and on your website. If it's buried on a page that I can't find, I won't really say that that would necessarily be accessible. Why not just put it at the bottom of your homepage or on every single page? We're going to want organizations to understand what information is being collected from them and how it will be used, how to contact the charity to review or correct information, how to tell the charity to not share personal information of the organization, and what security measures are in place. So looking at your existing privacy policy, if you are a nonprofit joining us today, look at these at this standard and compare it to what your privacy policy looks like. Can you answer these questions, and is it clear to you? And if it's not clear to you, then it's definitely not clear to the donor. So I would really suggest looking at your privacy policy. It could not be of more relevance, especially right now with cybersecurity. So it's definitely worth taking a look at your privacy policy. In addition to this, and it's definitely related, is looking at how easy it is for your donors to opt out of solicitations, or how easy it is for them to opt out of your third party selling or sharing of information. So it's kind of twofold. So if you are sending out e-blasts for looking out for solicitations, can that donor easily unsubscribe from your emails? And then the second part of that is if you are selling or sharing your information with third parties, when they are signing up to be on your newsletter, make it very clear that they can opt out of that. There's nothing that breaks the trust of any consumer of a business, any donor of a charity, quite like being bombarded with emails that they did not realize that they were signing up for. So making sure that you really maintain that trust with your donor is important, of course. Cyber and data security resources. This is information just not part of BBB standards, but if you do have any interest in cybersecurity, this would be a great resource for you. Standard 19 is cause-related marketing. So this is when a for-profit and a nonprofit work together to kind of find mutual benefit. So let's say, for example, that you are going to a coffee shop, and on that particular day or running for a month or for some duration of time, that they will be donating 25% of your small coffee to a certain organization. There are many different stipulations about how that transaction should look and the information that should be available to the donor upon that transaction. This is really relevant with organizations that might be on the larger scale. So if you are an organization who is looking to engage in cause-related marketing, I would definitely suggest reviewing this standard and also reviewing the New York State law surrounding this. But in terms of our standard, we're looking for the anticipated purchase price, portion of that purchase price, to be included during the transaction. So for example, is it 25 cents? And how long? Is it going to be a month? Is it going to be till end of day? When can we expect that this promotion will end? And any maximum or minimum guarantees. So I won't go into all of this. This is quite a wordy slide, but if you are interested or you are already engaging in a cause-related marketing solicitation or campaign, definitely suggest reviewing the language that is available to the donor upon the time of transaction. And standard 20 is complaints. So charities must respond promptly to complaints brought by a local BBB or the Wise Giving Alliance. So these are all complaints that have to do with the marketplace transaction. Let's say, for example, that you indicated to donors that if they gave $50 on this certain day, that they would receive a mug in the mail, a t-shirt, and they did not receive that mug or t-shirt. They can file that as a complaint to us, and we will work as much as we can toward that desired resolution with that nonprofit to see if they can meet that desired resolution. So again, this is only marketplace transactions. Or a complaint could also be something like getting off of a mailing list. So if you are an organization that makes it difficult for a donor or a consumer to get off of your mailing list, then they might file a complaint, and then I would work with that nonprofit to get them off of that mailing list if that's their resolution. So that concludes all of our 20 most missed standards. I really hope that this was helpful to you today. I will go a little bit more into detail about our program and about the SEAL program, about our most missed standards. This would be a great time to ask questions if you have any, and I'll be wrapping up in about 4 to 5 minutes. So when we're looking at the top 10 missed BBB standards at Metro New York, we're looking at the unrestricted net assets. Again, your 3 times your past year's expenses or 3 times your projected expenses for the next year. your board meeting attendance and how often you're having those meetings, as well as your effectiveness policy and assessment. So if you have any questions about those three, definitely ask me. They are clearly the most missed BBB standards. If you want to learn more about the BBB standards beyond this webinar, I certainly invite you to. This would be our list of BBB standards, as well as the different ways of implementing them. I tried my best to cover all of the ways to implement different standards like the annual report, and it's lengthy. There are definitely several ways to meet different standards, some more so than others. So if you have any concerns about something that you heard that you think, I might not be able to meet that, you might if you review the implementation guide and just chat with me directly. So reviewing the New York State Attorney General Charities Bureau website, any regulatory information that changes, again, the charitable solicitation disclosure requirement, these things change. Keeping on top of it is extremely important. FASB, this is the Financial Accounting Standards Board. So if you have a strong interest in guidance regarding financial reporting for nonprofits, certainly suggest that, as well, of course, as just nonprofit regulations for New York State. So the disclosure process, I'm speaking specifically for Metro New York and Upstate New York. If you are interested in submitting, definitely reach out to either of these emails. I'll be sending the deck to you, so you'll be able to get this email, or you could screenshot it right now. Either way, my colleagues in Upstate New York or myself would be really happy to help you get that report going. Even if you don't want to get a report going and you're just wanting to get a feel for what it might be, definitely reach out anyway. We can facilitate that conversation with you. And if you meet all 20 standards, your organization, again, is considered accredited. So you would be eligible to become a BBB accredited charity seal holder. This seal can be used on your solicitations and on your website with a licensing fee and agreement. Only BBB accredited charities may join this optional program. So for example, we do have an ad campaign, and I just sent out an email earlier today outlining what our ad campaign this year will be. We will be working with the New York Times with their New York Today newsletter, and we will be sending out they will be sending out an email that will include an advertisement from the BBB that has a list of all the charity seal holders who participate in our program. So if you are an accredited charity who is licensing that that seal, you would automatically be included in that campaign. And this is what it would look like to have that accredited charity seal on your website. And when you click on it, it will bring up your charity report. All right. So thank you all so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to answer your questions. This is the general inbox for the charity program, but I will be sending the e-blast directly from myself, so you'll have my contact directly as well as my number. I'm seeing a question. I'm not sure who last updated my organization's page. What would be the best way to find out? The best way to find out would be working and contacting with me directly. I have the ability to see who previously worked on your report, when it's eligible for renewal. I think I forgot to mention, so I'll mention it now. These reports are good once every 2 years. So right now we're looking at reaching out to organizations who actually renewed in 2020, a different world than what it feels like in 2022. So if there was turnover at your organization, which is super common, I'll be able to grant you access into your BBB charity report and into your portal so you can fill in all of that information, and I'm happy to facilitate that. Additionally, if you had submitted something like your measuring effectiveness policy or your budget and you're like, I have no idea where to even begin, happens all the time, I'm happy to send you what was previously submitted, and that will give you a little bit more context of what we're asking for if you've never seen something like that. And I think at this time, this is the only question I'm seeing. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them offline, but if not, I'll let you go early, wrapping up about 6 minutes before 2. So if you haven't eaten lunch yet, please feel free to do that now. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your rainy day if you're in New York. Thank you all so much for attending, and I look forward to maybe seeing you again at another webinar. Thanks so much and take care.